The following broadcast was produced by the Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco as part of our Lighthouse Learning Library.
Well, it's our privilege to have one of the most proactive people that I know, Mike May, come talk to you about his lifelong passion for how he does this, how does he get what he wants, whether it's in sports or being an entrepreneur or an activist or an advocate or working in the political process. All those things demand a certain consciousness and savoir-faire. Mike has been on the Honorary board of the LightHouse for many years. He started, I'm not sure if he beats your record, Dan, but he started as a camper here at Enchanted Hills in 1962. And one of our treasured items is a letter that we now have framed authorizing Mike to become officially a counselor here at Enchanted Hills from 1974. It needed special authorization and a written letter to do that for a blind counselor. That's a mark of our history, and Mike is part of it. He's been a part. His mother, OJ, directed camp here for 10 years. As we said earlier in the week, it's Mike's own selfless wiring up of all those speakers, OJ radio. You may hear it yet during this conference. Anyway, he's a friend, a philanthropist, a benefactor, and a deep thinker about how blind people work the world and get what they want. Give it up for Mike May.
Thanks very much. Speaking of consciousness, does anybody need to stand up for 30 seconds? Okay. Anybody need to lay down for 30 minutes? Well, we'll give you the 30-second stand-up, so go ahead and do that for a second. Don't go anywhere. A little blood flow is important. Oh, I like those groans. That's really good. Yeah, and our World Wide Web listeners, you can do the same thing. Get up from those computers. Yep. Yeah. Put some clothes on. Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. As Brian said, camp and I go back a long way. And a lot of history, a lot of firsts here for me, and it's always a treasure to come to this beautiful place. And especially to talk about one of the most challenging things that we all have to deal with, and that's getting a job. I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I'll give you some philosophical nuggets. Hopefully they won't be too repetitive from what you've heard already, but at the same time, I think there are going to be some common threads between what I say and the people before me and people afterwards. Let's hope so, because there's a lot of things that we have to keep beating on and focusing on in order to make things happen. And I'll tell you some of my personal stories, because it's not just about pontificating. It's about actually living experiences and having some successes and, of course, some failures. How do we get to our successes? Through lots of failures, right? I've traveled to about 33 countries, most of which I've gone to with a seeing eye dog, but some I can't travel to with a dog, so I've had a cane. So in my bag of tricks, I consider myself a pretty good dog handler and a good cane user. And throughout all of my experiences, good orientation and mobility is probably the #1 thing that one has to have in order to do any of the things that I'm going to be talking about. You can have 5 PhDs, but if you can't leave your room, I'm not sure what good they are. I like the phrase, when I think about all these countries that I've been to, and people say, what's your favorite country? I have one answer, which is the people make the places. And what that means is, as I travel, there's people that I meet along the way. Now, I should say that I'm by nature a fairly shy person, relatively soft-spoken, and I hated it when I was a kid, and I still really admonish people now if they have kids and they say, oh, Joey, he's shy. And I say, don't say that. You're pigeonholing somebody. They may not be saying anything right now, but they may be thinking a whole lot. Shy is such a degrading term, and I don't think it's helpful at all. So I hated being called shy, but the fact is, I was more of a listener than a talker, and some people called that shy. So when it comes to meeting people, how does one go about that if you're not a big talker? You can't just sit there and smile. You got to talk to people. So one of my real challenges was coming out of that shell and realizing that I had to speak up. And there's special challenges to speaking up when you can't see. You've got to be appropriate. You can't just blurt and start talking about your stuff. You want to be sensitive to the person that you're with or that you're around. And so in my travels on airplanes, the first thing is a barometer about, does the person next to you want to talk or not? I mean, do you want to talk or not? Maybe not. Maybe you want to sleep. But there is a little bell in my head that's going off saying, well, you know, you should at least check this person out. I mean, this might be your next boss, or this might be your next girlfriend. So maybe you ought to say something just to sense out the environment. So that's what I typically do on an airplane. And clearly, people let you know right off the bat if they don't want to talk, they want to read or something. But when you can't see, you have to be paying attention to that. Are they picking up a book right away? Are they looking at something? When you talk to them, do you hear their face go from looking down in their lap over to looking at you, and then they go back? That means they want to read. Are they leaning towards you? All of these messages, if you listen, it's amazing how much you can get from the person that's sitting there. So once you figure that out and you share a little information about yourself, and as you know, if you want to get information from somebody, you've got to share it first. You can't just start asking all the questions. It's good to say, I'm Mike May, I'm from Davis, California, and I'm going to Washington Dulles on a business meeting. And then if they want to tell you what they're doing and they want to reciprocate and engage in a dialogue, well, then you're on a roll. This is all part of networking. It's part of meeting people in person and on the phone. These are all things that you need to do as part of what we generically call schmoozing. You want to be getting out and not staying in your own room. So there's other decisions about how do you get out the door to begin with. Sometimes it's easier, less expensive, less of a hassle, just not to go anywhere. Should I go on a trip or not? And I'll tell you a couple examples of decision-making that I made that led to pretty amazing things for me in my life. One was after the Paralympics in 1984 in Innsbruck, when they announced that the first ever disabled skiers would be allowed to demonstrate skiing at the regular Olympics. This was the holy grail. This is what disabled athletes had been working towards. This is before the Paralympics, came right after the regular Olympics. And so to have a demonstration race opportunity was amazing. And I'm thinking, oh, I wonder if I get to be one of the ones that go. And then the next shoe dropped and they said, no, only the male amputees are going. No blind people because they require a guide, which means 2 beds, assuming you're not married to your guide or sleeping with them. So that was it. 24 male amputees went. The rest of the U.S. team packed up and flew back home. And back in the days when I could make decisions like this, my guide and I said, I don't think we're going home right now. We're going to rent a car and drive to Sarajevo, which was quite a ways away. So we drove down to Sarajevo. I've got my seeing-eye dog, Ricky, and I'm encountering all the things that one does in some other countries that aren't used to dogs and to blind people. You go into a hotel, sorry, you can't stay here, you can't bring that dog in here. And part of schmoozing is also being a good finagler and maybe a little bit inventive. So when they said I couldn't have my dog in there, I got to thinking, and after 2 hours of sitting in the lobby, I thought, you know, the Olympic mascot is this wolf named Vuchka. So I got an idea, and I went up to the counter and I said, you do realize that I am escorting the Olympic mascot. This is Vuchka. So they gave us a really nice room. They took good care of us. We got a spot. That was, you know, but there's one breakthrough at a time, one person, one hotel. My gosh, it's it's just an ongoing thing. You don't always want to be an ambassador when you're blind, but sometimes you're stuck. Each restaurant when I was in Sarajevo had to be an ambassador. And after waiting in line, because there were long lines and you had to make reservations, and we didn't have any reservations, no tickets, no nothing. And then they finally came back and said, we'd like you and Vuchka to come up to the front. And they actually kicked somebody else out of their table to give us a seat. You feel a little bit bad as the blind person when that happens, but not so bad that you just say, no, sorry, I'll go to the end of the line. We didn't have any tickets, so we got press passes to announce for CBS Radio the first ever Paralympic demonstration runs. When it actually came to doing the race, we weren't able to talk our way into having an official run, but when we were up at the course interviewing the amputees, and after the last one went, my guide had the brainstorm, and I wish it was me, but I got to credit him. These sighted people are useful sometimes. He said, Mike, let's just do it. There's nobody here. So without pre-running the course or having any idea how it was, and this is a steep, icy run, off we went, him guiding me down this run. And we did the first ever, and I think the only ever blind person race in the regular Olympics, albeit uninvited. And that really led into a tremendous amount of media. I think a lot of attitudes changed that day about what blind people could do, because millions of people saw this. And it gave me stories to tell later. And that came about because of this decision back in Innsbruck to fly home with the U.S. team or to spend my every last cent. Because believe me, when I got home, I was completely broke. So broke that when we got a call from the White House, from President Reagan, who said, one of his people said, could you come back to the White House to be honored with the Olympic team by Ronald Reagan, we really had to scramble to find money to get our tickets to go back there, which we did, and I was fortunate enough to be recognized in front of the whole world with comments in my name and my guide's name, and really in the name of disabled athletes everywhere. That all came about because of that decision, and I was really on the cusp. Should I go to Sarajevo or not? That all happened. I had another travel experience when I ended up after in 1975 when in Beirut they closed the university where I was going to go spend a year abroad, and ended up going to Ghana instead. And there's a whole chain of events that led into that experience. And when they told me after Beirut fell through and then going to Ghana, they said, oh, sorry, we can't take you because the family won't accept a blind person and a dog. And I just said, well, I'll go anyway. So I went to Accra, and fortunately the leader of the team, of the other students that was going over there, she said, we'll figure it out. The best words, that's music to my ears. We'll figure it out. There's always a way. And that's a huge part of any of these things you go off and do, you know, whether they're harebrained or half harebrained or whatever, or well thought out. Boy, having that attitude gets you. And that's the most profound experience I had in my life, going to Ghana and experiencing those things there. I can think back over a handful of people that I've met on airplanes just because I chatted them up the way we were talking. There was a guy from IBM named Ray, who I ended up staying in touch with, and when I went to Japan, he put me up for 4 days. And when you know a local and they show you around and they've got business connections, he was really useful in helping me connect with people who might be investors in the company I was involved in. I met a wonderful woman down in Orange County, Julie, who I stay in touch with and have had both social and business contacts through her. I met a guy named Bill Johnson, who was the head of Atlanta Scientific Atlanta, and ended up staying at his place in Aspen. No real business turned out of it, but we talked about a lot of different things. He gave me some good ideas, and had a great place to stay in Aspen. That was probably worth, $1,500 just for that. I met a guy just about a month ago, going out to Aspen for another event, a guy named Bob. He was a movie producer in L.A. and he lived in Aspen and commutes. And I got there and I went out for drinks with he and his partner, and then they gave me a ride to where I was going. There was another guy who was a musician I met named Genuine. And it's spelled Ginuwine, Genuine. I don't think I've ever sat next to anybody that wore so much cologne in my life. I know if he walked into this room or even into camp right now, I would know Genuine is here. He was a very cool guy. He was going off to Seattle on a tour. And I looked him up later. I had a hard time. I didn't realize how his name was spelled. I had a hard time finding him. He's got 15 albums or something since 1990s. And today, coming down from Portland, I sat next to a gal named Kristen, and I was in search last night of music venues in Portland, and I found one or two, but I didn't end up going to check them out. I probably missed some golden opportunity because I didn't do it. And she wrote up a list. She's lived in Portland, in that area all her life, and had all the different venues and commentaries on them. She wrote me up a whole list. Then I gave her my business card and said, could you just email those to me so I don't have to try to get somebody to decipher your handwriting. Another great contact. I was flying from San Francisco to Sacramento. Short flight, 25 minutes, squished into the two little seats in one of those regional jets with my dog and this young woman named Katie Gilmore. And we traded cards, we stayed in touch, and I asked her to come interview for a job at Sendero, and she decided she didn't want to commute. She was leaving Lockheed, she went to work for HP, and she had a really wonderful opportunity. She was managing this $20 million project to HP's coming out with their first voice over IP phone. And she was managing that project. She's 28 years old. Her youngest employee reporting to her was 37, and most of the people are in their 40s and 50s. And she said, I said, well, how is that, being the youngster, you know, supervising these older people? And she said, it's pretty good except when they call me kiddo. But she said, you know, I'd suck it up, and as long as they did their thing on time and got their work in, I didn't worry about being called kiddo. Well, Katie is now business development manager at Sendero. I wooed her away from HP because she really thought what we were doing with GPS for blind people was way cooler than what HP was doing, so now she works for us. I met her on an airplane. I mean, 20 minutes. It's amazing. And one of my favorite things was, I'll go backwards. Last week we had a house concert in Davis by this wonderful singer-songwriter, Sarah Beck. Some of you were there. And she was there because of a chain of events that came about when I went to an O&M conference in Nashville, and I decided I couldn't talk anybody into going out to hear some music. Who would go to Nashville without going to listen to music? It's criminal. But some people like to stay in the hotel. We were out on this kind of away from stuff. So I took a taxi, and it wasn't cheap. I went to my favorite place called the Bluebird Cafe. It's in this strip mall, but they have these rounds of singers. They each take a turn singing a song, 4 of them, and one of them was Sarah Beck. I met her afterwards, and there's a fun chain of events you can read about on my website. I won't try to tell you the whole story now, but suffice it to say that she's been to Enchanted Hills. She played at the O.J. Memorial. She met Stevie Wonder. He loved her voice. He invited her to sing with him in concert. And boom, 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 boom. I mean, the domino effect. You guys, you got to get out there. I mean, it's just like people are, why are we standing here? Let's go downtown and see who's around. I mean, it's amazing, all this stuff that's out there. Now, it may sound easy, or maybe this stuff happens to me. I've better luck than other people. But it's those decisions to get out there and to do that, to spend the $25 for the cab rather than just staying at the hotel. That made the difference. And I went by myself. I didn't go with a sighted person. I didn't have assistance. Sometimes that's actually a good thing, because then you're going to meet more people, because they say, hey, I got to go introduce myself to this person or see if they need some help. So these are things that apply to everybody, blind or sighted. But of course, blind folks have to exercise some alternative techniques and tools in our socializing so that these things come about, and you don't just move from being a bump on a log in your room to a bump on the log in a room. I mean, a bump's a bump. So what do we do when we walk into a room and we're working a room? Obviously, we're listening. That becomes a real challenge when the music's loud, the conversation is loud, and you can only hear 5 feet away. That's the extent of our listening capability. But we use what we have, right? I mean, you try to make the most of it. It depends if you know people's voices, whether that's helpful or not. Maybe you're at a business conference and you don't know anybody. So then what do you do? You certainly can use sighted assistance. That's pretty natural for us to go with a friend or family member or colleague. And particularly if we're in a conference where we're both participating, it makes sense to hang out with somebody else. So that's great. You use those sighted people. Good for driving, good for locating people in meetings. Maybe they're even fun to hang out with. So listening and sighted assistance, that's not a lot of alternatives, really. I mean, you think of what a social and professional disadvantage you're at compared to the sighted person who can look around that room, work it, recognize somebody, even if they don't know them well, they can say, that person looks kind of familiar. I've seen them somewhere before. And then they go up to them and talk to them. How do we deal with that? What are we going to do? Well, we can complain about it and moan that there isn't some technology to solve that problem. I'm working on that technology. I talk to Brian about this all the time. How are we going to get some people finder technology? It's going to happen. But in the meantime, guys, here's some other things you can think about. If you can find out ahead of time who's going to this event, that's helpful. At least it reduces the possibilities. If it's a conference, sometimes they'll share the list, sometimes they won't. I think some event like this, for example, probably would be easy enough for everybody to be on an email list and find out ahead of time who's coming. Then it also depends on where you hang out. That can make a difference in a room. Hang out by the bar. Most people are going to head that direction. It's a good audible clue to find. You can always go in a room and usually hear where the bar is. That's good. Or if there's an exit or an entrance that's common, it's good to hang out in that area. So people come through, and you're not in some place where they can't get to you, even if they do see you, because obviously we're depending an awful lot on people knowing us coming up to us. Unfortunately, that's the reality of the situation. We'll do our best to know who's there, to seek them out by hearing, to ask people who's around, but that's, we do what we have to do, and that's one of the things. Are there other ways to get attention? Well, it depends to what extremes you want to go. I bought this thing at a consumer electronics show recently. It's called a video name badge. And people come up to me, and it's a little 2-inch screen. I have it pinned to my chest the way you would any conference badge, and it's running a video. Or you can put a business card up there, and people come up to me and they say, "What is that?" And I said, "It's so you'll come up to me and ask me what it is." I mean, it's really too small for somebody to come watch a movie on. They can see funny things. I run this video of Jerry Coons driving a car and the Mythbusters show. It's a good attention getter. So they come up and they ask me what it is. Well, okay, that's all I need. Just come up and say hi, and then, "Hi, I'm Mike May, what's your name?" And away we go. That's been a great way to get attention. Being a dog user, it's the good news, bad news about having a dog. You're always on stage. Most people will come up to you. Some are afraid of the dog and will stay away, but I'd say on average, more people will come up. The dog's an icebreaker, more so than a cane. That's just the way it works. Remembering people's names is really important. I mean, they put a lot of stock in you recognizing their voice. God forbid if they have a common voice, you just can't remember it, but give it a shot. It's nice if you can remember the voice. And as a lot of people say in social situations, in order to remember a name, you repeat it. "Hi, I'm Mike May. Nice to meet you, Brian Bashan." And then you say it again in your head. Just that out loud thing is really useful and very important in schmoozing. What about breaking into conversations? That's can be a little tricky, but you've got to have a conversation with yourself. You say, self, do I just stand here? I haven't been talking to anybody for 10 minutes. I'm feeling really awkward. I can't just go have another drink. I will be soused, and that doesn't help in your way of working a room. So I think I need to sidle up and say hi. And that's where I go back to the Mike May that was reserved before, and I had to tell myself, self, break into that conversation. It's just what you got to do. Suck it up. Doesn't matter how reserved you are. Do it. You don't know who you're missing if you don't break into that conversation. I mean, 9 times out of 10, nothing will come of it. But what about the 1 out of 10 times? There are a few technology things that are helpful. One very undiscovered technique is using your phone's Bluetooth search capabilities. And this is something that Peter Contasani and I have promoted for a long time. It's not really taken off. It works a lot better in Europe than it does in the US, but it can work. And what that means is if you go to the Bluetooth on your phone and you make it discoverable and you do a search, you're going to hear about every other Bluetooth device within 30 feet that's turned on and also searching. So in this room, for example, if your phones were on, and I'm sure they're all off, I would do a search, and if your name, because you can go into your phone and you can name it Mike May or Mike 6600 or whatever you want to call it. You can name it, not just leave it its generic Nokia 2267. Once you name it, now another person can search for your device and they can see your name. Oh, there's Mike. And they can either call me if we're not within shouting distance, and 30 feet you probably should be, or at least reasonable conversational speaking up distance. And that'll work assuming people have their phones on. So in some conferences, it's really nice if somebody says at the beginning, by the way, turn your Bluetooth on, make it visible so that people within 30 feet can find you. We might want to try that here, just to see who's around. You'd be surprised. You do a search and you say, I'll be darned, I did not know Gina Harper was in this room. The Bluetooth will work. Yeah, so even though the cell phone coverage is poor, you can still get Bluetooth, you can still get Wi-Fi. And for future salivation, there are things in the works that might help with people recognition. This Bluetooth concept is one. There are electronic conference badges. There are companies that do this. There's one called Spot Me. And Spot Me, when you go to their conventions, instead of having big binders of print material, they hand you a PDA device, and that device then is connected via Wi-Fi, near-field communication, Bluetooth, cell, everything that there is, it's wired in, and they've Wi-Fi'd the whole conference area. So as you go around, if there's a change in meeting times, it's beamed to you. When you're sitting in a room like this, it tells you who's in the room with you. If the speaker says, I want to vote on an idea I have, all in favor, press number 1, and you do that on your PDA, and they get voting. When they want to do a survey at the end of the talk, you do the survey on the electronic device. And this company has said they're more than happy to make these devices accessible. I've talked to them. They want to do it. And I've tried to talk CSUN into engaging with them, and they haven't yet, but maybe they or some other conference will. Spot Me, S-P-O-T-M-E. And they charge $50, I think, per badge or per PDA. And so at a conference of 1,000 people, they're being paid $50,000 for this technology. However, you're not paying the $50. It's part of your conference registration. When you go to a conference and they print out these binders and they do all this other stuff for you, it easily costs them $50 a person anyway, probably more. A couple of other things you might want to think about just in terms of your approachability. It makes a big difference. People say, for example, be open when you want to be approached. Don't cross your legs, cross your arms, hunker down, be in a corner, different things like that. Your approachability is important. You know, how do you look? Do you look inviting? Does somebody look like they can come up to you? I've been involved in teaching a couple of classes years ago, and I heard recently, I don't know if it was in an NFB convention or one place where they were doing something very similar. We called it Advanced Visual Communication for the Blind. And this had to do with making eye contact. Even when you can't see, sighted people, they're looking for visual clues. You can learn to give a sidelong glance. You can look surprised. You can raise your eyebrows. You can look disgusted. Not disgusting. You can do all these visual things that are really helpful. And it's extremely powerful. You can flirt. I mean, this is a big part for sighted people, and it comes in handy in business as well as in social things. For example, when I was really thinking about this a lot was after I was just involved in my first startup company. And we interviewed, went to meetings with over 300 venture capital type people. 300. And my friend Rob and I would go in there, and he was the technology guru, and I was the listener, see? So my skill of being a good listener was coming in. And we'd play this role. Rob would do most of the talking, I'd do the listening. We'd sit next to each other, and we had signals where I'd kick him under the table or nudge him. In a few cases, he was overselling. It's like, Rob, they're sold. Don't say anything else. Stop. Other times, you'd find in any social or business situation, if somebody is not, if they're having an issue, there's some button that needs to be pushed. Maybe in the case of this company, it had to do with music and records, audio technology. So if they loved records, that was a positive button to push. If they had been burned by a previous investor because of some reason, you better find out why they got burned. So it was my job to listen between the lines, if you will, and figure out why these guys were either interested or not interested. And that was my role. And there was some visual stuff that went on in that too. I had to be able to communicate with Rob with my sidelong glance. And it worked. We ended up raising about $7 million. We were green behind the ears. We never raised money before. And we talked these guys into giving us $7 million. This is 1984, which was a lot of money. It's a lot today. So that was amazing to learn that capability, to sense what people are feeling and thinking and doing in order to get them interested in what we were up to. Very critical. I have a lot of other stories that probably would be better just talking about one-on-one, but I think I'll take a breather here for a second and just see if anybody has any questions or wants me to elaborate on any of this a bit more.
I'll go around with the mic. Questions? Okay, here we go, Lisa.
This is Lisa Gordon-Cushman from San Lorenzo. First of all, I love your points of interest for the GPS. I see them all over. They're really great.
Have you added your own?
Yes.
Yes. Way to go, Lisa.
Definitely. I do it as often as I can, as often as my GPS will work. And I wanted to know what phones are accessible enough to have where you can access all that information about your Bluetooth.
All phones have Bluetooth these days, even ones going way back. Some of the Motorola phones have this goofy thing where they time out after 60 seconds and the Bluetooth shuts off and you're not able to leave it on. That's annoying. I don't know if that's true with all Motorola's, but I've noticed that in the past. But certainly iPhones and Android phones, most of these things, you turn Bluetooth on. It does take power, so some people like to leave the Bluetooth off because it's draining some power. But certainly when you come into a situation where you want to be found, it's a good time to turn your Bluetooth on. And that's, if your phone talks, if it uses talks or mobile speak or voiceover or something, then you should be able to get the Bluetooth activated. And if anybody wants to know how to do that, we'll check it out. Come show me your phone and we'll find it and see if there's a place where you want to activate something called visibility. They might call it different things on different phones. And you also want to be able to name it, change it from that generic name to your name.
Go ahead, Megan.
Hi, Mike. This is Megan. By any chance, are you hiring?
Oh, go for it, baby. Go for it. Not at the moment, but that's always the thing. You know, you got to be there at the moment when somebody is hiring. So that's another good point. How do you be there at that right time and place? It's just like when I met Katie on the plane. I wasn't hiring right then. But, boy, there's nothing like good people. My philosophy at Sendero is find good people and keep them at all costs. So that's why we have people around the country, because if they want to move or if they want to live some other place, or I meet them at a conference and it turns out they're amazing, fine. Live in Buffalo, live in Perrysburg, Ohio, live in North Carolina, wherever. That's fine. These days, for most jobs, you don't really have to be in one particular spot. Some companies think they need to maintain control by having everybody on site, but I think most people's lifestyles now are shifting towards we'd like to have less time dealing with transportation and more time working, and then that gives you more time for your free time as well.
Mike, my name is Ramona, and I have a question for you in working a room. And you were talking about breaking into a conversation. What do you usually say?
Hi, I'm Mike May. I'm here for the CSUN conference. I'm visiting from Northern California. Where are you guys from?
Okay, so they're already having a conversation. You just walk in and say that.
Well, I try to listen for an opening. And that's always, you know, when is an opening? There are some people where there's never an opening. This was true in my family, and I come from where you sit at the dinner table, and when somebody stops talking, then you jump in. And in my family, you would never talk if you didn't interrupt somebody. So sometimes you do have to take that risk and interrupt, but I come from the old school where you don't do that.
Okay, Farhang.
Mike, my name is Farhang. Simple question. What is your website? I may have missed it when you must have mentioned it.
I haven't mentioned it.
Oh, okay.
The business website, easiest one for people to remember is accessiblegps.com. That'll take you to Sendero and information about all the GPS things that are out there. For more of my personal background and so forth, crashingthrough.com is also another website. Crashing Through.
Okay, Dean, I'm coming around here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Hi, this is Dean Chen. I go to a lot of events, and one of the problem I have a lot is I'm carrying my cane, I'm walking around, and I'm trying to hold my food at the same time carrying a plate with one hand. How do you do that? It seems like, how do you do that? Like, how do you hold your beer while holding your dog or holding your cane? Or how do you hold your plate eating?
Oh, good question. I've had a third arm grafted onto myself. It looks kind of funny, but it also helps you get attention. People come up and say, how does it you have 3 arms? That is hard. And people have come up with a couple of different things to hold a wine glass. There are these hors d'oeuvre plates that have a notch in the side. You can hang a wine glass. I always feel a little nervous about that. Yeah. There's another thing that you can put around your neck that can hold a wine glass, but if somebody bumps you, then it sloshes on down your shirt. Not too good. That is really tricky. It's one of the benefits either of a cane that you can put down or fold up and put in your pocket so you have 2 hands going on, or if you have a dog, the dog is well behaved in crowd situations so that you don't have to worry about the dog pulling your wine hand and knocking something over. It's an ongoing issue, and it certainly helps if you can find a bar table or someplace you can put stuff down so you have a hand free to shake with.
Right. Mike, Dexter, how do you stay and cultivate that creativity that you have? That's my first question. Second is, how do you stay on the cutting edge? How do you keep reading about, how do you continue to stay relevant in terms of the new technology that's rapidly coming out? And finally, I would love for you to share with us one of your startup stories in terms of where the idea came from, how you developed it, you know, and some of the results of that.
One of the hardest things is you schmooze a room, you make contacts, you get business cards, and then you don't follow up. I mean, you might as well not have gone other than you had a good time. So I have to remind myself constantly, because it's not that I'm afraid of following up, it's just that I'm busy. I'm on to the next thing. And so it's really important, and anybody that has a sales staff knows that you got to hold somebody's feet to the fire when they're out there and they're making sales calls, is get people excited, but then you got to call them back. You got to stay in touch. So I have this business card in my pocket right now from this gal I met on the plane today. I don't expect that's going anywhere. She had some really interesting technology that she sells that has to do with web security and fraud and so forth. And so I thought I should look into it, at least read about it. I need to send her an email and follow up. It's as simple as that. Just don't drop it. In the case of Katie, I did follow up the first time, but it was actually one of my staff who reminded me later, because we interviewed Katie, she decided she didn't want to commute, and then the job was open several months later. Somebody said, what about Katie? If we're going to go to, if we're going to allow remote, then she doesn't need to commute. What about her? So it was one of my staff members I have to give credit to for doing that. So there's a huge impact for me in my life of the people that are around me, whether it's friends, family, colleagues. Good people are amazing. They leverage us. And people get sometimes hung up on what does independence mean. It doesn't mean doing everything yourself. It means having, being fully actuated and being able to accomplish things. And that includes talking to other people, whether it's on the sidewalk and asking somebody for directions, or having a staff member who you really trust share, when we're talking about who should we hire, that person is leveraging me because they're helping me come up with ideas for employees to interview. So people, again, people make the places, people make us better, they leverage us. Good people are really important. As far as technology and idea, this is a conversation I could get into for a long time, because this is my world. I'm always thinking about what's the next thing. I really want some cool thing to happen. As I said, failures lead to successes, and this people finder thing has really been a failure so far. It's a real bugaboo. For 10 years, I've been telling people at conferences, I think a people finder would be really important for blind people. Somebody go make one. I'm giving away the idea. You can have it. Nobody's done it. I've applied for 4 grants. They've come back. They've been turned down. And what do they say in the reviewers? Some of the comments from the reviewers that come back? Blind people don't need this. Yeah, I don't know if they're blind, or sometimes, blind people are not, if we're used to doing things a certain way through our lives, we think, I'm fine, I get around, why do I need a people finder? You don't realize sometimes until you have the power of one of these things, the independence of it, that you've always had another way to do it. I'll give you an example of something that I'm guilty of myself. My technique for dealing with money is I make sure when somebody gives it back to me at a store, I hand it back to them and I say, tell me which bills are which, and I fold it and I put it away. It works, right? Why do we need money identifiers? Well, people are honest most of the time. I don't think I've ever been ripped off that I know of. So But I've been realizing in the last 6 months that this money identifier on the iPhone is really easy, it's quick, and sometimes I don't want to hand the money back to the person. I just stuff it in my pocket, and I check it out 10 minutes later, and I organize it, and I think, that was really fun. It works. I did it myself. I feel like a kid. I didn't think that I needed a money identifier until I was forced to use it, and even then, I'm being kind of slow on the uptake. Sorry? Yes?
I'm coming around with the mic.
Got it. So, Mike, on your list of things, I love the people finder. I would also like a chair finder. Now, let me explain what a chair finder is. This is not my idea. It's been around for a long time, and that is when you're in a big hall or a big room, and you get up and you want to go to the restroom or you have to go up and speak. You want to be able to go back to the place where you were, and some little localizing device would be great. No, not a loud beeper, but some device like that. So if you could combine the two, we might be able to have a device there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because people have been working on indoor positioning for at least 20 years. There's tens of millions of dollars that have gone into this because, not because blind people needed to find a chair, but it would work for that, but because emergency firefighters need to be found, or they need to find each other, or when people go into a building in Afghanistan looking for terrorists and they want to find each other or find bin Laden or whomever, they really need to know precisely where they are exactly. So that's why millions have gone into indoor navigation. It's yet to be solved. Sendero has worked now with 3 different companies on indoor navigation because we think it's very important. We're working with another one right now that has a very promising technology for that purpose. Someday, it's going to help us find a chair. It's going to help us find the milk in the grocery store. It's going to help us find the jewelry counter in Nordstrom's. It's not that far off. It's going to happen. I mean, 20 years without a solution and millions of dollars. I don't think people are giving up on this technology. We're certainly not giving up on it.
Mike, I'm wondering about, are you guys looking at RFID possibilities as that technology works its way into credit cards?
We look at everything, RFID, there's passive and active RFID, there's near-field communication, there's all these signals floating around in the room. And a lot of companies, universities, if you get out there and look at the research that's going on right now, there's a lot of projects that are funded to experiment with all of these things. Wi-Fi triangulation is popular. Image recognition, there's a system called SLAM that has to do with image recognition and robotics that works reasonably well. There's floor tiles with passive RFID in them that you can have put into a building now. And that's all good, but they're infrastructure dependent. You've got to go stick those things somewhere. If the tag is on a product, that's one thing, but that will only transmit a few inches. So to be able to use RFID at a longer range requires batteries, it requires a lot of infrastructure development. That's not ideal, but it's certainly one of the things being looked into.
Dan?
Yeah, Mike and I have had discussions over the years of hooking up radar and GPS to a Segway device, and Mike said the problem with that would be with the intersection crossing. But Mike was already on top of it and seemed to have already thought about it, so I thought I was being real smart. But what about the, when are we going to see the Sendero GTO coming out, the auto drive car that we'll all be able to, we're waiting for the Sendero GTO.
Well, I talked to Dean Kamen, who's the inventor of the Segway and the iBot, and he said, skip the driving, go to the sky. That's his theory. He's a pretty amazing inventor. A lot less congestion up there. Everything's got to be automated anyway, so it doesn't matter if you're blind or not. But there's a lot to be said for the kind of obstacle avoidance technology that's going into vehicles now. And having a human operator and having a blind person involved in that is pretty cool, both from a conceptual standpoint as well as a practical one. So I'm all for these kinds of research projects and pilot projects to see where things are going. By the way, the Segway thing, there's a company that makes some really precise precisioning technology that's used in refueling aircraft. And you know, these things are going at 700 miles an hour and they have to get within inches of each other. You think if they could do that, they could guide a blind person around a pole. And so one of those companies really was intrigued with this idea of mounting some of their stuff on a Segway and making a blind person able to be zipping around town. So who knows? There's enough government funding for these things. Maybe, usually these guys just get funded and it's a cool research project and then nothing happens. But every once in a while, something peels out of that world into something we can actually use. Just a couple more minutes.
Hi, this is Jerry.
Sorry, who was that?
Jerry, sorry. I have actually, I love technology. I bought at Sharper Image this thing to help me find golf balls. That's solar, I mean, it uses a radar that reflects off a particular paint that's on the golf ball. And I've actually used that thing to find Easter eggs indoors. So I'm thinking if I put a golf ball set down at my table where I'm sitting and walked up, I could find it back to my seat. You're just using the technology that's already available.
Very cool. I love it. Well, you know, we've got all these cool devices, and Sendero and universities and lots of people will be working on this. The LightHouse is collaborating on some of these projects, like the OMOBI and Lookshare projects and lots of others. Anytime I have something where we're going to need some blind guinea pigs, you know, I call Brian up and say, will you guys team up on this, because we're going to need some blind people to check this out and to test it. So there's lots of opportunities for these things to evolve, but it comes back around to what we have today and the human experience. And I think the hardest thing for us is not to get a people finder or to wait around for that, but for you or I to take that emotional plunge and break into that conversation and get out there and make it happen and not be waiting around and saying, I'm sorry this can't happen because I can't see. Because amazingly cool stuff does happen. I mean, the people I've been fortunate to meet and the experience I've had are a result of pushing past that little interior barrier that I have and just talking to people and going and being independent and not being tied to the sighted guide if they need to go home early or whatever. You know, just get out there and keep doing it. So keep that in mind. Remember, there's always a way, and look forward to talking to you guys more around the fireside or whatever we're doing here. Thank you.